My name is Sonia Sexton. I'm 28 years old, and I am a sergeant in the United States Army. I've spent my entire life following orders, but I never imagined the cruelest one would come from my own mother. That night, the air in our Fayetteville kitchen was stretched tighter than a drumhead. I was exhausted after spending months draining my entire $10,000 in savings and using every precious day of my leave to organize my brother's wedding. When I calmly refused his final, absurd demand, my mother, Joyce, looked at me, her eyes as cold as ice. "Sonia," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "the greatest gift you can give your brother for his wedding is to disappear from this family forever." The entire room went silent. My father stared down into his mashed potatoes. My brother just smirked. In that moment, the daughter who had always craved their approval died. A soldier rose in her place. They had no idea they had just given me an order I would execute with absolute precision. Before I tell you my story, let me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe if you believe loyalty should be a two-way street. This is the story of how I carried out their final order. The silence in our North Carolina home was a living thing. It was heavy and suffocating, clinging to the familiar scent of my mother's fried chicken and the buttery aroma of fresh-baked biscuits. It was the kind of silence that precedes an ambush. I sat at the dinner table, still in my Army combat uniform, the digital camouflage pattern feeling strangely out of place against the floral wallpaper. Bone-deep exhaustion had settled into my muscles after a long day on base, but this tension was something different. It was a battlefield of its own. My father, Jeffrey, scraped his fork against his plate with a sound that grated on my nerves. My mother, Joyce, sat perfectly still, a queen surveying her tense kingdom. And my brother, Brent, the golden child groom-to-be, finally broke the ceasefire. He dabbed his lips with a napkin, a gesture of pure, unearned arrogance. "So, just a few last-minute tweaks for tomorrow," he began, his tone casual, as if he were discussing the weather. Lindsay and I were thinking, the Prosecco feels a little cheap. We need to upgrade to Veuve Clicquot. And that local DJ you booked? I found a guy in Atlanta who's way better. He can be here tomorrow afternoon. He said it all so easily, as if money was a theoretical concept and I was his personal magician, tasked with pulling it out of thin air. I took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to anchor myself. "Brent," I said, keeping my voice level and calm, "we can't. The entire $10,000 budget is gone." I looked around the table, hoping for a flicker of understanding. That money was my hazard pay from my last deployment in Afghanistan. It's all been spent. The vendors are paid. There's nothing left. I added, falling back on the language that made sense to me. The resources are expended. That last phrase, a simple statement of fact in my world, was the spark that lit the fuse. Brent let out a short, mocking laugh. "There's that military talk again," he sneered, leaning back in his chair. "Real life doesn't run on your little budgets, Sergeant." He said my rank like it was an insult, a dirty word. My mother seized the opening instantly. Her support for him was reflexive, absolute. "You're being so selfish, Sonia." Her voice, once a source of comfort, was now a weapon aimed directly at me. "This is the most important day of your brother's life, and you're nickel-and-diming him over champagne? Don't ruin this for him," my father mumbled into his plate, his allegiance, as always, following the path of least resistance. I felt the familiar heat of frustration rise in my chest, but I pushed it down. "It's not about being selfish," I tried to explain, my voice strained. "It's my life savings. I gave everything I had to make this wedding happen." But they weren't listening. They never listened. They didn't see the 16-hour days I'd spent on the phone with caterers and florists. They didn't see the weekends I'd given up, the leave I'd burned through. They didn't see me, their daughter, their sister. They saw a resource, a logistics officer for their grand plans. And now, that resource was depleted, and they were angry. The feeling of being surrounded, of being flanked by the very people who were supposed to be my platoon, made it hard to breathe. The air in the room felt thin, stolen from my lungs. I held my ground. I had to. It was the only thing I had left. "The answer is no," I said, my voice quiet but firm. There is no more money. That's when my mother delivered the killing blow. She stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, drawing all the focus in the room. She pointed a finger at me, her nail a perfect, polished red spear, and then she spoke the words that would detonate my world. Sonia, she said, her voice devoid of all warmth, a chilling, hollow sound. The greatest wedding gift you can give your brother is to disappear from this family. Forever. The words hung in the air, each one a piece of shrapnel embedding itself in my heart. I looked around the table, desperately searching for an ally, for someone to say, "That's enough." Nothing. My father became intensely focused on mashing his potatoes, swirling them into a perfect, cowardly peak. Lindsay, Brent's fiancée, suddenly found her manicure fascinating, studying her nails as if they held the answers to the universe. And Brent. Brent looked pleased. A small, smug smirk played on his lips. He had won. In that deafening silence, the cold, hard truth hit me with the force of a physical impact. I wasn't family. I was a function, a tool, a convenience. And now that I was no longer useful, I was being discarded. But then, something strange happened. The part of me that was a daughter. The part that had spent a lifetime desperately trying to earn their love, their approval, shattered. It crumbled into dust, and from the wreckage, something else took control. The soldier. My training, drilled into me through years of discipline and hardship, took over. My posture corrected itself. My spine straightened. My shoulders went back. I rose from my chair, my movements fluid and precise. I met my mother's icy gaze, and I gave her the only response a soldier gives to a direct order. "Roger that." The words were crisp, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion. A single tear might have given them satisfaction. A scream would have been a victory. But this calm, cold acceptance, it stunned them into silence. Their faces, a moment ago so full of righteous fury and contempt, were now masks of confusion. I didn't give them time to recover. Without another word, I picked up my wallet and my keys from the counter. I turned my back on them and walked to the front door. I didn't look back. I didn't hesitate. Each step was measured, deliberate. My hand closed around the doorknob, turned it, and I stepped out into the cool Fayetteville night. When the front door slammed shut, the sound wasn't one of anger. It was a sound of finality, the end of a chapter, the closing of a book. And as I stood there on the porch, the echoes of my old life fading behind me, I didn't hear my own sobs. I only heard a single question echoing in the void. How did it ever come to this? I don't know how long I sat there, parked down the street from the house that was no longer my home, the engine of my old Ford F-150 ticking softly as it cooled. The darkness outside was absolute, a thick southern night that swallowed the glow of the streetlights. I stared at my own reflection in the rearview mirror, a face etched with a fatigue that had nothing to do with my job. The hard lines of a soldier's discipline were there, yes, but beneath them, the question from the porch still echoed. How did it ever come to this? And the answer came not in a single thought, but in a flood of ghosts. The reflection in the mirror blurred, the face of the 28-year-old sergeant dissolving into a much younger, more hopeful version of myself. The mirror became a window, and through it I saw an 18-year-old girl standing ramrod straight on a parade ground, waiting for a word of praise that would never arrive. It was 10 years ago, under the blistering sun of Fort Jackson, South Carolina. The air was thick with the smell of freshly cut grass and the nervous pride of thousands of new soldiers. It was basic training graduation day. For 9 weeks, I had been broken down and rebuilt. I had pushed my body and mind past limits I never knew existed. And standing there, in my freshly pressed dress uniform, the weight of the rifle on my shoulder, feeling like a part of me, I had never been more proud. I scanned the crowded bleachers, my eyes searching for them for the 3 faces that mattered most. Weeks before, I'd sent them a letter, carefully explaining what this day meant, not just to me, but in the culture of the military. It was a rite of passage, a transformation. But the rows of smiling, tearful families blurred together, and none of them were mine. That night, clutching the payphone receiver in the barracks, I finally got through. The line was crackly, and in the background, I could hear laughter and the clinking of glasses. My mother's voice was bright, distracted. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry we couldn't make it," she'd said, the apology sounding like an afterthought. "Brent had a big mock trial tournament at his law school today. We all had to be there to support him. You understand, it's for his real career." His real career. The words hit me harder than any drill sergeant's tirade. My own accomplishment, the most difficult and significant of my young life, wasn't real. It was a sideshow, easily dismissed for a practice run of my brother's future glory. That night, lying in my bunk, surrounded by celebrating soldiers and their families, I felt a deep, profound loneliness settle into my bones. It was the first major scar on a map that would soon become crowded. The memories kept coming. 2 years later, I received my first enlistment bonus, a check that felt like a fortune. Back home, my parents were struggling with a leaky roof they couldn't afford to fix. Without a second thought, I sent nearly half the money home. I pictured their relief, maybe even a proud phone call. But the call never came. They took the money, and the roof was fixed. A few weeks after, home on leave, I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when I overheard my father talking to our neighbor over the backyard fence. "Yeah, the roof's all set now," he said with a casual wave of his hand. "Sonia sent some of that army money home. The government pays them for all sorts of things, you know." Army money. He said it as if it were a lottery winning, a government handout that required no effort, no risk. He had no concept of the sleepless nights, the grueling marches, the constant threat that was the price for that check. My sacrifice wasn't a gift from a loving daughter. It was an entitlement, a benefit they were owed. I was just a pipeline from the U.S. Treasury to their bank account. And it was always like that. My life was an anecdote. Brent's was the main event. When I came home on leave, my stories of training exercises, of the incredible people I'd met, of the challenges I'd overcome, were treated as opening acts. They would be interrupted, glossed over, until the conversation inevitably turned to Brent. Brent filed a fascinating motion last week. Brent had lunch with a senior partner. I remember one visit with painful clarity. I'd just been awarded the Army Commendation Medal for my work on a community relations project. It was a significant honor, a heavy bronze medallion in a velvet-lined case. I brought it home, my heart swelling with a quiet pride I hoped, just for once, they would share. My father picked it up, hefted its weight for a second, and gave a non-committal, Nice. He placed it on the coffee table next to a stack of old Southern Living magazines. The next morning, I found it tucked between an article on pecan pie and an ad for porch furniture, forgotten. That same day, my mother hung a new picture frame on the wall of honor in the living room. It was a small, grainy article from the local paper about Brent winning a minor case. It was framed in polished mahogany. All the warning signs were there, flashing like red lights on a runway. The clearest one came from my best friend, my battle buddy, David Chen. I'd made the mistake of bringing him home for dinner once. He was polite, respectful, and observant. On the drive back to Fort Bragg, the silence in his truck was heavy. Finally, he spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "Sonia," he said, not taking his eyes off the road. "I don't mean to overstep, but the way they treat you, it's not right." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "They don't see you. They see an ATM and a problem solver." I did what I always did. I got defensive. I made excuses. "You don't understand them. That's just how they are." I protected them, building a wall of denial around their behavior because the truth was too painful to face. Now, sitting alone in the dark, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, David's words came back to me, not as a warning, but as a verdict. He was right. He had been right all along. I had spent a decade ignoring a mountain of evidence, dismissing every slight, explaining away every cruelty. I had been so desperate for a love that I was willing to believe in a fantasy. But tonight, the fantasy had burned to the ground, and in the harsh, unforgiving light of the truth, I could finally see the map of my own scars. Each one was a lesson I'd refused to learn, until now. The map of scars wasn't just a collection of old wounds, It was a blueprint. It explained the flawed logic that led me to the single greatest sacrifice of my career, 2 years before that final, terrible dinner. It explained Operation Patriot Grill. At the time, I was a corporal, and I had just been handed a golden ticket. Orders had come down selecting me for a public affairs position at the Pentagon. It wasn't just a good assignment, it was a career maker. For an enlisted soldier, it was like being drafted into the major leagues. I was celebrating with my unit at a local bar just outside Fort Bragg, the sound of their cheers and backpats ringing in my ears, when my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was thin, choked with a panic I hadn't heard since my grandfather's funeral. "Sonia, it's over!" she cried, the words tumbling out between sobs. "The diner. We're going to lose everything." The Patriot Grill was more than just their business. It was their identity. A classic Southern diner in Fayetteville, North Carolina, serving biscuits and gravy to soldiers before dawn and chicken fried steak to families at dusk. It was their American dream. And now, that dream was turning into a nightmare of unpaid bills and foreclosure notices. In the soldier's creed, there is a line that is hammered into you from day one: "I will never leave a fallen comrade." Standing there, amidst the celebration for my future, all I could hear was that creed. My family was my first platoon, and they were falling. That night, I made a decision that my commanding officer called career suicide. I respectfully declined the assignment to the Pentagon and filed for an extended leave of absence. My comrades were in trouble. A soldier doesn't walk away from that. Returning to Fayetteville was like deploying to a disaster zone. The diner was bleeding money, morale was at zero, and my parents were paralyzed by despair. So I did the only thing I knew how. I treated it like a military campaign. I became the commanding officer of Operation Patriot Grill. The first few weeks were a brutal reconnaissance mission. I learned the books, the suppliers, the staff, the inventory. Then came the operational phase. My days started at 4 a.m. and ended long after midnight. I was the first one in and the last one out. I was on my feet for 18 hours a day, a constant cycle of mopping greasy floors, negotiating with angry vendors, flipping burgers on the grill during the lunch rush, and scrubbing pots until my hands were raw. The fatigue was immense, a physical weight that settled deep in my bones, but the mission drove me forward. I redesigned the entire strategy. The menu was revamped to appeal directly to my fellow soldiers from Fort Bragg. I added the Reveille Scramble, a massive plate of eggs, bacon, sausage, and potatoes, designed for someone about to go on a 10-mile run. I used my network, my friendships, my connections in the military community. I passed out flyers on base. I offered discounts to different units. Slowly, the Patriot Grill became an unofficial hub, a place where soldiers could get a solid, comforting meal that tasted like home. I poured every ounce of my discipline, my sweat, and even my tears into the cracked linoleum floors of that place. I was defending an outpost, and I refused to let it fall. And after 6 grueling months, the battle was won. The diner wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. The debts were paid off. The dining room was packed every night. We were in the black, more profitable than ever before. I had done it. I had completed the mission. A profound sense of pride washed over me. I had stared down an impossible situation, and, through sheer force of will, I had won. I returned to my unit at Fort Bragg, my body aching but my spirit soaring. I waited for the phone call, the celebratory dinner, the simple, heartfelt thank you. But my phone remained silent. Days turned into weeks. The silence was confusing at first, then unsettling. Finally, after nearly a month, an email from my mother appeared in my inbox. The subject line was curt: family meeting. The email said it was time to discuss the future of the diner. A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. This was it. This was the moment they would finally acknowledge what I had done. I walked into that meeting feeling like a soldier returning from a successful campaign, ready to be decorated. But there was no ceremony. There were no words of gratitude. Instead, my parents sat at the head of the table, my brother Brent beside them, looking impossibly smug. My mother cleared her throat and made the announcement. They had decided, she said, to turn over the full-time management of the Patriot Grill to Brent. The reason? Brent's a lawyer, she stated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He has a real head for business. The words implied that my 6 months of blood and sweat, my strategic planning, my successful turnaround of a failing enterprise were nothing more than manual labor. Brent, who hadn't so much as wiped down a counter during the entire crisis, just smiled. He leaned over, patted me condescendingly on the shoulder, and delivered the line that vaporized any remaining hope I had. Good job on the support mission, sis. Support mission? The words echoed in my head. I was in support. I was the commander. I was the strategist. I was the infantry on the front lines. In that single devastating moment, I understood the bitter truth. I could win every war for them, but I would never, ever be given a seat at the victor's table. If you have ever poured your heart and soul into something for your family, only to have it completely dismissed, support this story with a like and comment with the word invisible if you know what that feels like. That night, I didn't sleep. The pain was still there, a dull, heavy ache in my chest. But something else was rising through it, a cold, clear resolve. My mother had given me an order. My family had ratified it with their silence. A soldier follows orders. So the next morning, I woke up not with sadness, but with a mission list. Operation Liberate Sonia had begun. First objective, asset recovery. My command post was a sticky booth at a Waffle House at 500 hours. The air, thick with the smell of sizzling bacon and burnt coffee, felt charged with energy. In front of me, on the Formica tabletop, was a black coffee, a pen, and a small tactical notebook. Instead of drowning in sorrow, I had spent the pre-dawn hours planning my counteroffensive. The page was a grid of names and numbers, a list of targets. Each line item was a financial tie I had established for my brother's wedding, and each one was about to be severed. It was a raid, planned with military precision. I took a sip of the bitter coffee, the heat spreading through me, mirroring the icy determination solidifying in my veins. First target, the catering company. The most expensive, the linchpin of the entire event. I took a deep breath, the kind you take before stepping out of the wire, and dialed. A cheerful woman's voice answered immediately. Good morning, Divine Dining. This is Brenda. Good morning, Brenda. This is Sergeant Sonia Sexton. Recognition dawned in her voice. Oh, Ms. Sexton. Good morning. We are all set for the big day tomorrow. The Veuve Clicquot is chilled and ready to go. I kept my voice level, professional, devoid of any emotion. Brenda, I'm calling to inform you that I need to cancel the service for tomorrow's event. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the background chatter of her office fade as she processed what I'd said. Cancel? But the wedding is tomorrow. That's correct, I said calmly. Per our contract, cancellations are permitted up to 24 hours prior to the event for a full refund of the deposit. I paid the $7,000 deposit on my credit card. I need you to process that refund today. More silence. I could almost hear the frantic flipping of pages as she checked the contract. Her voice, when it returned, was flustered. Yes, I see that here. It's highly unusual, Miss Sexton. These are unusual circumstances, I replied, the words clipped and final. Please confirm when the refund has been processed. Yes, of course, she stammered. I'll take care of it right now. The call ended. I drew a single, clean line through the first item on my list. A surge of something powerful, something I hadn't felt in a long time, shot through me. It was control. The dominoes began to fall. Next target, the florist. Same script, same calm, unshakable tone. The owner protested, talking about the imported roses already in his cooler. I referred him to the cancellation clause in his contract. The refund was processed. I drew another line in my notebook. Next, the live band from Atlanta. They were angrier, more belligerent. I didn't argue. I simply stated the facts of our agreement. They threatened a cancellation fee. I informed them I would dispute it with my credit card company, citing the contract they had signed. They backed down. Another line. the venue decorator, the limousine service. One by one, I dismantled the wedding I'd single-handedly funded. Each call was a precise, surgical strike. I was polite, I was firm, I was immovable. I was a United States Army sergeant executing a mission. There were no obstacles, there were only targets to be neutralized. By 0800 hours, as the morning sun streamed through the greasy windows of the Waffle House, my mission was complete. I checked my banking app. A series of deposits had appeared, one after another. In total, $9,500 had been returned to my account. I stared at the number on the screen. It wasn't just money. It was my deployment pay from Afghanistan. It was my freedom. It was justice, delivered not by a court, but by a series of quiet, early morning phone calls. At approximately over 900 hours, the storm broke. My phone, which had been silent, erupted. The first call was from Brent. I let it go to voicemail. His message was frantic, his voice cracking with panic. "Sonia, what the hell is going on? The caterer just called me. They said you canceled everything. Call me back, now." I looked at his name on the screen, a flicker of a smile touching my lips, and I silenced the ringer. Then came the texts, a barrage of them. Then the voicemails from my mother, a symphony of escalating hysteria. The first one was pure rage. "Sonia Marie Sexton, you call me this instant. You are ruining this family." The next one was laced with desperate pleading. "Please, honey, what is happening? Why would you do this to your brother?" But the words had lost their power. They were no longer bullets that could pierce my heart. They were just noise, static from a communications channel I had already permanently shut down. I didn't answer. I didn't reply. I just watched the screen light up again and again, a distant signal fire from an enemy I'd already left behind. They had given me my final order. I was just carrying it out. I was disappearing. They wanted me to disappear. Fine. But I wasn't going to vanish into thin air. I was going to execute a strategic redeployment. I was going to a place where a soldier is respected. In the days following my counteroffensive, my family didn't give up. They simply shifted tactics. They launched an information warfare campaign on the one battlefield I had no interest in defending: Facebook. My brother Brent fired the first shot. He wrote a long, tragically self-serving post, painting himself as the heartbroken victim of a jealous, unstable little sister. He spoke of his special day being deliberately sabotaged by my erratic behavior. He never mentioned the $10,000, of course. He just crafted a narrative that made him the golden child once more, now unfairly persecuted. The reinforcements arrived quickly. My aunts and uncles, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, all flooded the comments section with their support. Poor Joyce and Jeffrey, to have to endure such a difficult child. "We're praying for you, Brent." Some people just can't stand to see others happy. I sat on the floor of my barracks room, scrolling through the digital assassination. Each comment was a small sting, a pinprick of the old pain. They were trying to control the narrative, to isolate me, to make me the villain in the small echo chamber of our hometown. For a moment, the old Sonia, the girl desperate for approval, wanted to fight back. She wanted to type out a furious rebuttal, listing every sacrifice, every slight, every dollar. But the soldier in me took over. She recognized a losing battle. This was their territory, their war. Engaging would only lead to a protracted, messy conflict with no clear victory. My war was bigger. My mission was my own life. I felt a strange sense of clarity as I closed the app. I would not engage. My silence would be my answer. There was, however, one final piece of logistical cleanup. Before I could truly redeploy, I had to cut the last financial supply line. I drove my old Ford F-150 to the local Fayetteville bank, the same one where my family had their accounts. I walked in, my back straight, my uniform crisp, and sat down with a personal banker. I explained that several years prior, I had made a formal, documented investment of $5,000 into the startup capital for the Patriot Grill. I now wished to withdraw that investment, as was my right according to the agreement we had all signed. The banker, a man who had known my family for years, looked at me with pity in his eyes. He knew the whispers, the gossip. But business was business. The paperwork was in order. He made the call, and a few minutes later, handed me a cashier's check. As I walked out of that bank, the check heavy in my hand, I felt no guilt. It wasn't an act of revenge, it was an act of self-preservation. I was severing the final anchor that tied me to their sinking ship. Back on base, I walked directly to the S1, the personnel office. A quote I had once read from General George S. Patton echoed in my mind. Never tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do, and they will surprise you with their ingenuity. The old Sonia had always waited to be told what to do. The new Sonia was telling herself. The mission was to survive and thrive, and for that, I needed new ground. I had already done the research. There was an open requisition for a public affairs NCO at Fort Carson, Colorado. It was a perfect fit for my skills, a challenging assignment in a place I had never been. I drafted a formal request for a permanent change of station, a PCS in Army terms. In it, I didn't mention my family. I focused on my accomplishments, my desire for new challenges, and my commitment to the Army. I highlighted how a new environment would broaden my experience and make me a better leader. My commanding officer reviewed the request. He was a good man who had seen my dedication firsthand for years. He'd also seen the toll my family took on me. He looked up from the papers, his expression serious. "Are you sure about this, Sergeant?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I replied, my voice steady. "I am." He nodded slowly, then signed the form. "All right then, I'll endorse it. Colorado, huh? The mountains will be good for you." A few weeks later, the official orders came through. I held the paper in my hands, reading the 2 lines over and over again. Reporting station, Fort Carson, Colorado Springs. It wasn't just a location. It was a promise. It was an escape hatch I had built for myself, using the very system that had forged me into the soldier I was. The day I left Fayetteville, a soft southern rain was falling, washing the world clean. I had already sold or given away most of my possessions. I didn't need anything from that life anymore. My entire world was packed into 2 large duffel bags and a rucksack in the bed of my truck. As I drove my F-150 through the gates of Fort Bragg for the last time, I didn't look back. There was nothing there for me to see. On the passenger seat next to me lay a folded road map of the United States. My finger traced the route west, across the rolling hills of Tennessee, over the flat plains of Kansas, and finally, up into the jagged, majestic promise of Colorado. I wasn't running away. I was on my way to my next duty station. My mission this time was to rebuild the life of Sergeant Sonia Sexton. In Fayetteville, I'd always felt suffocated. The sky seemed to hang low and heavy, thick with humidity and unspoken resentments. But here, arriving in Colorado Springs with the Rocky Mountains standing guard on the horizon, I took my first full, deep breath in years. The sky here was vast and brilliant blue. For the first time, I felt like I had room to breathe. That feeling extended to my new post at Fort Carson. The moment I reported for duty, I felt a seismic shift. This wasn't the good old boy network of a small southern town. This was a professional, highly organized unit. My new commanding officer, a sharp, no-nonsense female major, greeted me by reviewing my service record, not by asking who my family was. She saw my qualifications, my commendations, my deployment history. She saw me, the soldier. During my first week, I was tasked with drafting a new media engagement plan for an upcoming community event. The old Sonia would have hesitated, second-guessing every word, bracing for her ideas to be dismissed. But I was operating under new protocols. I spent 2 days developing a comprehensive strategy and presented it to the major, my heart pounding with a familiar anxiety. She listened intently, nodding as I went through the key points. When I finished, a tense silence filled her office. I prepared for the inevitable but, the suggestion that a more senior NCO should take the lead. Instead, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "This is an excellent plan, Sergeant. Well thought out and actionable. Run with it." Just like that, No argument, no condescension, just respect for my competence. I walked out of her office feeling an inch taller. It was such a simple thing, being heard, being valued, but it felt like a foreign language I was finally beginning to understand. The healing continued outside the base gates. One Saturday afternoon, exploring the area, I stumbled upon a small independent coffee shop tucked away in a strip mall called The Grindstone. The moment I walked in, I knew I was among my own. The air smelled of dark roast coffee and old leather, and the walls were covered in military memorabilia. Behind the counter was a big man with a kind smile and a magnificent silver beard. He wore a retired first sergeant's insignia on his worn flannel shirt. He took one look at my haircut and posture, and knew. "New to Carson?" he asked, his voice a low, friendly rumble. "Yes, sir," I replied. He just nodded, grabbing a thick ceramic mug. He filled it with steaming black coffee and slid it across the counter. "Well, around here, we don't care where you came from. We only care how you fight. Welcome to Colorado." That was my introduction to retired Master Sergeant Mike Callahan, or Sarge Mike, to everyone who entered his sanctuary. He didn't ask prying questions. He didn't need my life story. He just provided good coffee and a safe place to land. The Grindstone became my haven, a place where I could just sit and be, without judgment, without expectation. Sarge Mike was the one who pushed me to explore the real Colorado. "The Army can heal a lot of things, Sexton," he told me one day, "but the mountains can heal the rest." So I started hiking. My first solo trip was to Garden of the Gods. Standing among those colossal ancient red rock formations, I felt infinitesimally small. And for the first time, that felt like a good thing. The silent, towering stones had witnessed millennia. My family drama, my personal pain, suddenly seemed insignificant in the face of such timeless grandeur. I hiked the trails of Cheyenne Mountain, pushing my body up steep inclines, the burn in my lungs feeling like a purification. I would stand at the summit, the whole of Colorado Springs spread out below me, and just breathe the crisp, clean mountain air, feeling it cleanse the last toxic remnants of North Carolina from my soul. One evening, my phone rang. It was a number I still recognized, my old battle buddy, David Chen. His voice was hesitant. He was calling with news. "Sonia, I don't know how to tell you this," he started, "but the Patriot grill went under." I listened, my own voice quiet as he filled in the details. Without my planning and without my final $5,000 investment, Brent had run it into the ground in less than 3 months. The business was gone. My parents had been forced to sell their house to cover the debts. Brent's fiancée, Lindsay, had called off the wedding and left him. The Sexton empire, built on my silent sacrifices, had crumbled into dust. As David spoke, I waited for the feeling I thought I was supposed to have. A triumphant surge of satisfaction, of schadenfreude. But it never came. There was no joy, no, "I told you so." There was only a profound, hollow emptiness, a quiet finality. It was truly over. I thanked David for letting me know and ended the call. I walked to my small apartment window and looked out at the silhouette of the Rocky Mountains against the twilight sky. And the only emotion I felt was an overwhelming wave of gratitude. Gratitude that I was here, 1,000 miles away from the wreckage. Gratitude that I had been brave enough to obey it in my own way. Sarge Mike's words from that first day kept echoing in my mind. In the Army, we don't leave a comrade behind. For years, I had misapplied that sacred oath to my family, believing it was a blind duty. But sitting in the quiet comfort of the Grindstone, watching this retired Master Sergeant treat every soldier who walked through his door with gruff, unwavering respect, I finally understood. It wasn't a blind duty. It was a choice. It was about choosing who was worthy of your loyalty. Sarge Mike became more than just a coffee slinger. He became the mentor I never had. He had a way of listening that made you feel seen. I'd find myself talking, the stories of my past spilling out in disjointed fragments, and he would just nod, his gaze never leaving mine. He never judged. He never offered easy platitudes. Instead, he shared pieces of his own life. He told me about firefights in Fallujah, about the suffocating dust and the constant thrumming fear. He also told me about the silent battles he fought when he came home, the struggle to fit back into a world that no longer made sense. He taught me that strength wasn't about enduring pain in silence. It was about knowing when to pull back to protect yourself. A strategic retreat ain't cowardice, Sexton, he said one afternoon, wiping down the counter. It's how you survive to fight another day. The trick is knowing which hills are worth dying on, and which ones you ought to just cede to the enemy. His words were a lifeline, reframing my escape not as a failure, but as a tactical victory. As the Colorado autumn painted the aspen trees in brilliant gold, the holiday season approached. Thanksgiving. The word alone brought a familiar pang of anxiety, a ghost of tense family dinners past. It would be my first major holiday completely alone, and a quiet sadness began to creep in. As if he could read my mind, Sarge Mike clapped me on the shoulder a few days before the holiday. "Sexton," he boomed, "you're not doing anything on Thursday, are you?" I shook my head. "Good," he said with a grin. "Then you're officially invited to the annual Grindstone Orphans Thanksgiving." It was a tradition he'd started years ago for all the soldiers, active duty and veterans, who had nowhere else to go. When I walked in on Thanksgiving Day, the little coffee shop was transformed. Long tables were pushed together, groaning under the weight of classic American comfort food. 3 enormous roasted turkeys, mountains of mashed potatoes and stuffing, green bean casserole, and a dozen pumpkin pies. The place was packed with a loud, laughing, mismatched family of soldiers from every generation. I sat at a table between a young private fresh out of basic training who missed his mom's cooking and a grizzled Vietnam vet who told the most outrageous stories. We shared food, we traded stories from the field, and we laughed until our sides hurt. For the first time in my life, I felt the uncomplicated warmth of a holiday meal. There were no hidden agendas, no simmering resentments. This was camaraderie. This was loyalty. This, I realized, was family. With the weight of my past finally lifted, I began to thrive at work. Free from the constant psychological drain, my focus was sharp, my creativity unburdened. My skills and dedication didn't go unnoticed. 6 months after my arrival at Fort Carson, I was promoted to staff sergeant. It was a huge achievement, a testament to the new life I was building. The first person I told was Sarge Mike. When I walked into the grindstone wearing my new rank, he took one look, and his face broke into a huge grin. He came out from behind the counter and enveloped me in a bear hug that lifted me off the floor. "I knew you had it in you," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he set me down. "I'm so damn proud of you, Sergeant." Those 5 words, "I'm so damn proud of you," hit me with the force of a physical blow. They were the words I had craved my entire life, the validation I had performed endless feats to earn. And here they were, given freely and sincerely by a man who owed me nothing. His pride meant more than every hollow, conditional compliment my family had ever given me combined. That evening, long after the last customer had left, I stayed behind to help him clean up. In the quiet of the empty coffee shop, surrounded by the ghosts of soldiers past, I finally told him everything. I told him about the Pentagon, the diner, the wedding. And for the first time, I told another human being the exact words my mother had said to me. As I spoke, the tears I had suppressed for so long finally broke free. They weren't loud, hysterical sobs, but a silent, steady stream that traced paths down my cheeks. I couldn't stop them. Sarge Mike didn't say a word. He just pulled up a stool, sat next to me, and placed a heavy, comforting hand on my shoulder, letting me cry it all out. When the tears finally subsided, he looked at me, his eyes full of a fierce, protective light. "They gave you a wrongful order, Sexton," he said, his voice a low growl. "But you executed it in the right way. You chose your own life. That's the bravest thing a soldier can do." His words were absolution. They were the validation I didn't even know I was searching for. He saw my retreat not as weakness, but as the ultimate act of courage. If you have ever found a Sarge Mike in your life, a mentor, a friend, a chosen family member who saw your worth when you couldn't, Support this story with a like and comment with their first name or just the word family. Because sometimes the family you build is the one that truly saves you. Healing, I've learned, is not a straight line. It's a series of forward skirmishes, punctuated by the occasional unexpected ambush from the past. My ambush arrived on a Tuesday, nearly a year after I had redeployed to Colorado. It came in a plain, cream-colored envelope delivered to my unit's mailroom. I saw it from across the room, and my blood ran cold. The handwriting was my mother's, elegant, looping cursive that I had known my entire life. My heart hammered against my ribs. After a year of blissful radio silence, the enemy had re-established contact. I took the letter, my fingers numb. It felt heavier than it should, weighted with a year of unspoken words and unresolved history. I carried it back to my apartment and placed it on my small kitchen table. And there it sat. For 2 whole days, I didn't touch it. I'd walk by, my eyes drawn to it against my will. It was a ghost from another life, a silent paper phantom threatening the hard-won peace I had built in the shadow of the Rockies. The letter sat on my table like an unexploded mine. I knew it was a trap inside. The only question was I strong enough not to step on it? On the 3rd day, I couldn't stand it anymore. With a deep breath, I slit the envelope open. The letter inside was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation, a calculated psychological operation designed to breach all my defenses. It did not begin with an apology. Of course not. An apology would have been an admission of wrongdoing, something my mother, Joyce, was incapable of. Instead, it began with a carefully crafted bombshell. She wrote that she had recently been diagnosed with a serious heart condition. The details were vague, just enough to inspire fear without providing any verifiable facts. She wrote that my father was devastated, barely able to function. That Brent was lost without his family's support system intact. Then came the second wave of the assault. Nostalgia. She filled the next paragraph with sweet, syrupy memories of my childhood. The time she taught me to ride a bike. The lullabies she used to sing. They were curated, carefully selected memories, polished to a perfect shine, designed to remind me of a time when I had been her little girl. A time before I had become a disappointment. The final paragraph was the kill shot, aimed directly at the heart of the dutiful daughter she'd raised me to be. "The family needs you, Sonia," she wrote. "You were always the strong one. You are our only hope." The letter ended with the ultimate guilt trip, a line so perfectly cruel it could have been weaponized. "Don't let your mother die without seeing her daughter one last time." And despite everything, despite the years of neglect, the public humiliation, the final, brutal order to disappear, it worked. A part of me, the small, hopeful girl who had spent her life craving their love, felt a sickening twist of guilt. What if she was telling the truth? What if her heart really was failing? What kind of monster would I be to ignore my dying mother's plea? I spent that night staring at the ceiling, my mind a war zone. Her words echoed in the darkness, pulling me back into the familiar, toxic whirlpool of doubt and obligation. The past was launching a powerful counterattack, and my defenses were starting to crumble. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back had dark circles under her eyes, her face etched with the old, familiar anxiety. I knew I couldn't face this alone. I folded the letter, put it in my pocket, and drove straight to the grindstone. Sarge Mike was behind the counter, as always, a comforting fixture in my new world. He took one look at my face, and his friendly expression hardened into one of concern. "Trouble?" he asked, his voice low. I didn't say a word. I just pulled the letter from my pocket and handed it to him. He took it, leaning against the counter, and read it carefully. His face was a mask of stone, completely unreadable. He read it once, then read it again, his eyes scanning the lines as if he were analyzing enemy intelligence. When he was done, he folded it precisely and placed it on the counter between us. He looked me straight in the eye, and with the calm, unwavering authority of a master sergeant, he said a single sentence that cut through all my emotional fog. "This is an ambush, Sergeant." He tapped the letter with a thick finger. "Look at the tactics. The intelligence is vague. a serious heart condition with no specifics. That's meant to create maximum fear with minimum facts. Then you have the appeal to past sentiment, trying to soften the target. And finally, the primary weapon, deploying guilt to make you feel solely responsible for the outcome. He leaned in a little closer, his voice dropping to a gravelly, serious tone. They haven't changed, Sonia. They've just changed their tactics. This isn't a peace treaty. It's a lure. Don't walk into their trap. His words were like a bucket of ice water, shocking my system back to clarity. He wasn't telling me what to feel. He was showing me what to see. He saw the letter not as a desperate plea from a loving mother, but as a calculated maneuver from a skilled emotional manipulator. He saw it for what it was. And now, so did I. I walked out of the grindstone and back into the bright Colorado sun, Sarge Mike's words echoing in my mind. This is an ambush. He was right. And for the first time, I saw it with the cold, hard clarity of a soldier, not the blurry, tear-filled eyes of a daughter. The emotional fog had lifted, and what remained was the stark, unchangeable truth of the battlefield. I had spent my entire life following their orders. Today, I would issue my first and most important order to myself. Live. Back in my apartment, a strange and profound sense of calm settled over me. There was no rage bubbling under my skin, no desire for a screaming, tearful confrontation over the phone. I realized that any emotional outburst was exactly what they expected, what they fed on. Engaging in their theater of chaos would be playing their game by their rules. My response had to be different. It had to be executed from a place of strength, not woundedness. It had to be precise, controlled, and final. It had to be an act of command. I sat down at my small desk, the place where I paid my bills and planned my weeks. Taped to the wall around it were the artifacts of my new life, my own personal wall of honor. There was a picture of my unit after a grueling field exercise, all of us grinning and covered in mud, a testament to shared hardship and genuine camaraderie. There was a goofy selfie Sarge Mike and I had taken behind the counter of the grindstone, both of us with coffee mustaches. And centered above it all was a breathtaking shot I'd taken from the summit of Pikes Peak, the world stretching out endlessly below, a vast expanse of possibility. These weren't just pictures. They were symbols of my new territory, evidence of the life I had fought to build. They would be my strength. I took out a single sheet of plain, crisp white paper and a good, heavy pen. I wouldn't allow shaky hands or emotional scrawl to bleed into this. This was not a letter from a hurt daughter. This was a communique. It was a formal, final declaration. Forgiveness, I was learning, didn't mean reconciliation. It didn't mean you had to let people back into your life to hurt you again. Sometimes forgiveness was simply accepting that people are who they are, and then loving them enough to let them go, for your own sake. As a soldier, I'd been trained to be direct, to communicate with clarity and purpose, to eliminate all ambiguity from my reports. As a daughter, I'd been trained to do the opposite, to soften my words, to manage their delicate feelings, to apologize for things that were never my fault. In that moment, sitting at my desk, the soldier won. I thought about the United States Declaration of Independence, a document I had studied and sworn an oath to defend. It didn't just list grievances or beg for understanding. It declared a new and separate state of being. It claimed the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. My family, the country I had been born into, had systematically violated all three. This letter would be my own personal declaration of independence. The words came quickly, simply, devoid of the anger and pain that had defined so much of my life. I knew exactly what needed to be said, and more importantly, what needed to be left unsaid. Dear Mom and Dad, I have received your letter. I wish you both well and hope Mom's health improves. However, my life and my duty are here in Colorado now. I will not be returning. That was it. 3 simple, respectful, and unbreakable sentences. No accusations that would invite an argument. No justifications that would be twisted and used against me. No pleading for them to finally understand, because I now understood that they never would. There was nothing left to explain. There was only a boundary, drawn not in the sand, but in concrete. I paused before signing it, the pen hovering over the paper. Who was I now? The reflection in the darkened window showed me. I was not the scared little girl who had tried so desperately to earn their love. I was a leader. I was a professional. I was a woman who had forged a new, stronger identity in the very fires of their rejection. I signed my name with the title I had earned through my own merit, my own sweat, my own honor. Staff Sergeant Sonia Sexton. The next morning, I walked to the blue USPS mailbox at the end of my street. The air was cool and crisp. The letter felt light in my hand, impossibly light for the generational weight it carried. I pulled the handle, slid it through the slot, and the metallic clank as it dropped inside was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a lock clicking firmly into place, the sound of a final, decisive action. I had answered their original order. I had disappeared from their lives, but not in the way they intended. I had disappeared from their control and been reborn somewhere else. Returning to my apartment, I knew there was one final step to secure my new fortress. I sat on my couch, took out my phone, and began the systematic process of severing all communication lines. I opened my contacts and scrolled to her name. Mom. For a second, a phantom pain, a ghost of the little girl's longing, pricked at my heart. I took a breath, held it, and pressed block. The small confirmation pop-up, "Are you sure?" felt like a final test. I am. Block. It was a quiet, digital gavel striking down a lifetime of manipulation. Next, my father. Dad. This one was easier. I was blocking the sound of his complicit silence. Block. My brother, Brent. I almost laughed. This was the easiest of all. It felt like nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just dismissal. Block. Then I went to Facebook, the digital battlefield of their smear campaign. One by one, I blocked every aunt, uncle, and cousin who had clicked like on Brent's post, who had added their little drops of poison in the comments. Each tap of the screen was a quiet, deliberate act of self-preservation. The small beep of each successful block was like the sound of a deadbolt sliding home on a heavy steel door. I was securing my perimeter. I was protecting the peace I had fought and bled for. When it was done, a profound silence filled my apartment. It wasn't an empty or lonely silence. It was a peaceful one, full of potential. For my entire life, I had been an exposed outpost, undermanned and vulnerable to constant attack from the very people who were supposed to be my command center. But not anymore. I had built walls. I had secured the gates. I had become a fortress. And for the first time, I felt truly, completely safe. Several years have passed since I built my fortress. The peace I fought for wasn't a fragile ceasefire. It was a lasting, sustainable peace, built on the solid foundation of self-respect and carefully guarded boundaries. The past is not a ghost that haunts me anymore. It's a map of a foreign country I once navigated, a place I learned from but have no desire to revisit. Today, my name is Sergeant First Class Sonia Sexton. I am a leader, a mentor, and a woman who is, finally, at home in her own life. Just last week, I stood in front of a new group of young soldiers, fresh-faced and wide-eyed, recently assigned to Fort Carson. They were gathered for an integration briefing, and I was their speaker. As I looked out at their anxious faces, I saw a ghost of myself, the earnest, try-hard girl who believed that loyalty was a blank check you gave to people simply because they shared your blood. I didn't tell them my story, not the specifics, but I told them what my story had taught me. I spoke about the importance of camaraderie, of building a family within the ranks of the Army. Look around you, I said, my voice steady and sure. Your squad, your platoon, these are the people who will have your back when it matters most. Your family is who you choose to fight for, and who chooses to fight for you. Sometimes that's the family you're born with, and sometimes you have to be brave enough to build it yourself. I saw a flicker of understanding in the eyes of a young private in the front row, a kid who looked homesick and overwhelmed. In that moment, the circle felt complete. I was no longer the soldier in need of saving. I was the one offering the map. My past never went away, but it no longer defines me. Instead, I've learned to use it. It's become a part of my leadership toolkit. My personal history has given me a kind of radar for the soldiers who are struggling in silence. I can spot the ones who are trying too hard, the ones who flinch at criticism, the ones who spend holidays alone in the barracks because the thought of going home is more painful than the loneliness. They are the ones I quietly take aside. They are the ones I invite to the grindstone. Over the years, Sarge Mike and I have formed an unofficial support system. He provides the coffee and the gruff wisdom, and I provide the living proof that you can survive a toxic family and build a life of honor and purpose. We've created the very safety net I so desperately needed all those years ago. My pain, once a source of shame and isolation, has been repurposed. It has become a legacy of empathy. As the great American poet Maya Angelou once said, "You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them." I decided. My life here in Colorado is full. Not perfect, not without its challenges, but genuinely, deeply full. I have a career that I love, one that pushes me and gives me purpose. I have a community, a chosen family of soldiers and veterans who understand loyalty in the way I do, as something earned, not demanded. And I have a peace of mind that feels like a quiet, steady flame inside me. I still hike. Every chance I get, I drive my now very old, very loved F-150 to a trailhead and lose myself in the mountains. Every time I reach a summit, I find a quiet spot, look out over the vast, majestic landscape, and take a deep, grateful breath. I'm grateful for the pain that taught me my own strength. I'm grateful for the courage it took to walk away. I'm grateful for the life I have now, a life I didn't inherit, but one that I built, piece by piece, with my own two hands. I've learned that a true home isn't the house you were born in. It's the place where you are allowed to be, finally and fully, yourself. The story ends here, but my life goes on. It ends with this image, the one I return to again and again. I am standing on the peak of a mountain, the sun setting over Colorado Springs, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The wind is cool and clean against my face, whipping through my hair. I close my eyes and I listen. I no longer hear the critical, demanding voices from my past. They are gone, silenced not by anger, but by distance and time. All I hear is the sound of the wind rushing over the peaks and the strong, steady beat of my own heart. I spent a lifetime following orders, but the most important order, the one I follow every single day, is the one I finally gave to myself. Live a life worthy of the fight it took to claim it. Live with honor, with courage, and with integrity. Mission complete. Thank you for sharing this part of my journey with me. My story is just one, but I know the feelings behind it. The fight for respect, the search for peace, are shared by so many. This space is more than just a channel. It's a community for survivors, a place to remind each other that we are not invisible and that our strength is real. If my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video. And to hear more stories of resilience and to be part of this community, subscribe and join us. Leave one word in the comments that describes your own mission forward.